Can you hear my coffee maker in the background? Should I mute?
No, sir, we do not hear it.
Okay.
Okay, we are live on YouTube, and I'm going to say good morning on the chat. All right, good morning, everyone. We have a Rock'em Sock'em group meeting today. We are going to be reading through, including the footnotes, an amazing vision that Dr. Jung had on Christmas Day, Christmas evening, 1913. And so it's 7.5 months before, it's about 7 months before the beginning of World War I. And Dr. Jung had himself a prefiguration vision. So his psyche was telling him that, wow, there's something going on in the collective unconscious. And so one of the things that we're interested in doing here is helping people understand what their unconscious is and does, and what the collective unconscious does. And to that end, I want to mention again our confluence, which is coming up in October. It's actually going to start on the 12th of October, a day earlier than we had previously said. And, it's one of the main features of this confluence will be the emergence of the collective unconscious. And so it's this year it's going to be called The Creator's Art, a Vision for the Future Through Art, Psychology, and Creativity. And so what we are actually doing here is evoking the same sort of thing that happened to Dr. Jung naturally. It came up for him naturally. Nobody got it going for him. And this is what we're going to be addressing today. But I'm going to put the link to the confluence on the YouTube chat just so you can find it. And if you are planning to come, you can write me an email at skipconover@gmail.com, and I will get you on the mailing list so that you get all the notices. We don't have the expenses up yet, but the tuition for the event, which will be kind of a 4-day event, it'll be Thursday night, all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and probably some events into Monday, starting on Thursday, October 12th, 2023. The tuition for the event is $495, which is very small for a California event. And you will also be able to stay, it's room and board included, and you can either stay in a private room, a double room, a dorm style room, which means the bathroom and shower are down the hall, or you can camp on the site. And all those things are at your disposal if you want to use them. And your lodging will include all meals. So my estimate is that the total cost for the confluence will be around $1,000, including lodging and meals, and plus your whatever it costs you to get there and to get home. So it's in Mount Madonna Retreat Center in Watsonville, California. It's a wonderful location. and it overlooks Monterey Bay, and it has all the accoutrements of a spa where you can have massages or hot baths or whatever makes you happy. So today we are going to start with how we are condemned to haste. We're reading the Red Book by C.G. Jung, and this is the Reader's Edition. So we are on page 202 of the Reader's Edition. I'm not sure what the page number is in the folio edition, but we are in, I believe, chapter 11, which is resolution. And this is the lead up to Dr. Jung's vision that he had on Christmas night, 1913. The spirit of this time has condemned us to haste. You have no more futurity and no more past if you serve the spirit of this time. We need the life of eternity. We bear the future and the past in the depths. The future is old and the past is young. You serve the spirit of this time and believe that you are able to escape the spirit of the depths, but the depths do not hesitate any longer and will force you into the mysteries of Christ. It belongs to this mystery that man is not redeemed through the hero, but becomes a Christ himself. The antecedent example of the saints symbolically teaches us this. And there's a footnote. The draft and corrected draft have, quote, just as the old prophets, the ancients, stood before the mysterium of Christ, I also stand as yet before this mysterium of Christ, insofar as I reassume the past, although I lived 2,000 years after him later, and at one time believed I was a Christian, but I had never been a Christ. Okay, now what he's referring to here is the sacrifice. And basically what he is saying is that we all must make sacrifice in our life. That's how we're going to understand what life means. We all make sacrifices. Christ made his sacrifice 2,000 years ago, but we've each done that. Okay, I'm going to read on.
As before you do, when it says that in the end of the footnote, but I had never been a Christ, in that sense, that's an acorn sprouting right there into what will later be the oak tree of the title of chapter 5 of Ion, of Christ as self. So right. I think what's happening is that kind of inner divinity of the psyche and how that runs our voice of nature is basically being born here. It's not naturalized, but it's starting to come into being.
Yeah. And what is meant by, in my opinion, what is meant by being born again is that when you're first born, you don't know anything. You're an infant. Some kind goddess sticks a nipple in your mouth and you eat, and she cleans you up every day. And gradually you learn the ways of the world. But the being born a second time means to be born into life in such a way that you understand that it's all of our lot to make a sacrifice and to be, continue the process on. All of us are the results of billions of years of life, surviving and reproducing, going back to single-celled organisms, and probably before that in ways that I don't understand. But going back to single-celled organisms, all our ancestors did two things successfully. They survived until they reproduced. All right. When I was in California, it was the acacia. Here, I don't know. We have everything in bloom, so I'm allergic to everything.
No, I get it. I get it. I looking around for why my nose was running yesterday, and then I looked over and went, "Oh, well, there's a big juniper bush 8 feet away that could do something."
Yeah.
That's why all the little yellow pollen's on my hat. Okay. It's
So part
interesting.
of my sacrifice is that every 2 weeks I go in and have 2 shots all summer. So and into the winter, I have at least 1 shot a week in allergy shots, and I'm allergic to everything the doctor tested. I'm one of only 3 of his patients out of 10,000 achieved that mark.
Well, it's funny that a lot of people, I mean, think allergies are weakness, but it's just like asthma. It's actually a hyperactive immune
Yes.
system. So it's like your
Yeah.
immune system is overstrong going, So you've got sentinels going, no.
Right. Exactly. And so anyway, I apologize for my cough.
No. I think your comment though too about born again, it's interesting because Christianity is, that expert religion to co-opt previous pagan holidays. And I think the born again piece is co-opting the psychological individuation of the child becoming the parent of the adult.
Yeah.
That occurs at the end of adolescence. And what's interesting is the born again then turns you back into the ecclesiastical structure of the church, when in reality, you're supposed to be turning out into the world. So there's almost an Oedipal complex of sending you back home, and you tried to fly away, and then you get, they grab your feet and pull you back in.
Right.
So there's a kind of a double-edged sword that goes on there.
Yeah. And there's what happens when you pass this boundary, let's say in life,
Right.
is that you no longer have any doubts about what you're doing. You just do. And, sort of a gross example of this is in the movie Patton. Right at the beginning, there's a speech by George C. Scott mimicking Patton. And one of the things he says is that when you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do. Well, life is like that. You'll know what to do when each step comes. And once you've passed this boundary into the second part of life, then you don't hesitate. You no longer fear death. There's nothing to fear in death, because when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family.
The same when you're stupid.
And the same when you're stupid, right? So there's nothing to fear in death. And the question is, how will you leave your spirit here on this earth? And there are spirits of our ancestors all around us all the time, and when you become sensitive to those, then you'll be guided. And this isn't a religious message. This paragraph that I've just read is not intended as a message that you should return to Christianity. Indeed, Dr. Jung went to church only 2 times. The first time was after he was 12, let's say. He went only twice. And the 2 times were when he was married, and the second time was at his funeral. He was in a church. But other than that, he knew what to do. And it gave him great confidence, particularly after he passed this Red Book period. And this Red Book period was sort of the wrenching experience that he had, that informed the rest of his life, actually. He calls it the prima materia of his life. Okay, so I'm going to read on. Whoever wants to see will see badly. It was my will that deceived me. It was my will that provoked the huge uproar among the demons. Should I therefore not want anything? I have, and I have fulfilled my will as well as I could, and thus I fed everything in me that strived. In the end, I found I wanted myself in everything, but without looking for myself. Therefore, I no longer wanted to seek myself outside of myself, but within. Then I wanted to grasp myself, and then I wanted to go on again without knowing what I wanted, and thus I fell into the mystery. Should I therefore not want anything anymore? You wanted this war. That is good. If you had not, then the evil of this war would be small. But with your wanting, you make the evil great. If you do not succeed in producing the greatest evil out of this war, you will never learn the violent deed and learn to overcome fighting, which lies outside you. Therefore, it is good if you want to this greatest evil with your whole heart. You are Christians and run after heroes and wait for redeemers who should take the agony on themselves for you and totally spare you Golgotha. With that, you pile up a mountain of cavalry over all Europe. If you succeed in making a terrible evil out of this war and throw innumerable victims into this abyss, this is good, since it makes each of you ready to sacrifice himself. For as you draw close to the accomplishment of Christ's mystery. Okay, there's a couple more footnotes here. And thus spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche wanted, quote, to redeem the past and to transform everything. It was into an I wanted it thus, that alone do I call redemption. Okay, and
that refers to the amor fati, the
right.
embrace of fate.
In love with your fate. Okay, and on February 11th, 1916, Jung said in a discussion at the Association of Analytical Psychology, quote, we abuse the will. Natural growth is subjugated to the will. War teaches us the will is of no use. We will see where this leads. We are completely subject to the absolute power of the becoming. And another footnote, the draft and corrected draft have, since we are inwardly still ancient Jews and heathens with unholy gods. Okay, so those are,
I think also
and
too,
one more where it says, with that you, and he says, he changes it to we ourselves in the corrected draft. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, in this paragraph, I prefer to reverse two sentences. It makes more sense now, not to change his writing, but in terms of how people can bring it on to embrace it. When he says, therefore, it is good if you want the greatest evil with your whole heart, and then say, if you do not succeed in producing the greatest evil out of this war, you will never learn the violent deed and learn to overcome fighting what lies outside you. So in that sense, James Hillman's An Incredible Love of War, that whole projecting inner conflict onto other people becomes, when he's saying the greatest evil, want the greatest evil with your whole heart, that's within yourself. That's your biggest daimons and demons, and embracing that as part of you to go through the Negretto, to get to the Calcinaccio, to process, to individuate through those quote unquote evils, as it were, and actually, keep your friends close and keep those enemies closer. Yeah. Because what happens is, I think even explain that, people say, well, why would you want your enemies close? And I always say, well, because your enemies can't betray you. They hate you already. So, the thing is, betrayal always comes from within. And so when you see the enemies open up like parting the Red Sea, you have incoming previous friendlies. And so I think he's then making an admonition here to, do not fight your demons, embrace them, engage them, and process them. Because I think what happens is you will find the treasure in the trouble, and the roads you do not want to go down usually hold your best path.
So Kathy asked the question, have we learned, or do we still turn away in denial? And the answer is, for most, I think, we have not learned. But there is a lesson here. And it's a lesson that I had a lot of trouble understanding. In the audiobook Psychology of the Unconscious, which is really well done by Robert Bethune. This was the early English version of transformations of the symbols of the libido. But in Psychology of the Unconscious, which is the book that separated Jung from Freud, he said several times, in times of peace, plan for war. And I never understood that, because I said to myself, well, I'm a military man. I've seen war in maybe not all its gruesomeness, but I've seen enough gruesome parts of it to not like it. Why would we want to plan for war? Why would we want to have war? And the answer is that the unity is a resolution of the opposites, and the opposites here are peace and war. And so what we must do is hold the opposites in our grasp constantly and evaluate them and try to work them together until the point where we have a unity and we understand that we are warlike creatures, but at the same time, we don't want war. And but Jung said that on August the 1st, 1914, he was in Scotland, in Aberdeen, giving a lecture, and he immediately boarded a ship to get himself back to Switzerland. This was the beginning of World War I, the actual outbreak of the conflict. And he said, on that day, I was the happiest man alive, because he knew that all these prefigurations that he had, and there were 12 of them apparently, I haven't counted them up, but there are a lot, that he was having were not the result of schizophrenia or some other mental disease or defect, but were actual precognitive dreams or visions that he was having, taking them out of the collective unconscious. And it was, at that moment that he actually discovered the collective unconscious and started to understand it. And so, the point is that, but then he wasn't the happiest man alive, because he said when he arrived in Ostend, which is in Belgium, which was his port of call on the European continent to take the train back to Zurich, people were dancing in the streets. There were parties. Everybody was ecstatic. So he wasn't the happiest man alive. There were a lot of people that were thrilled that there was going to be a war. Wow, whoopee.
Yes.
And he made that comment as well. So, maybe he was the happiest man alive. But the point is that these things are in us, and we need to start to get a handle on it. Now,
Well, and I think
go ahead.
when
Go ahead.
people when people have been through hell, they tend to talk about it less, not because they're hiding it, not because they avoid it, because they really aren't surprised by a lot. And so anxiety disappears. Anxiety to me is not required. Nature doesn't have any. So, and one of our jobs, I think, is to be our own voice of nature. And it's interesting to me too, when he starts out, the spirit of this time has condemned us to haste. Well, there's the false sense of urgency that gets most people, me included here and there, in trouble, where there's zero thoughtfulness, there's zero feeling sense to dial into. Yeah, I may think this, but I don't believe that. I may feel this, but I don't really believe what I'm feeling. And sitting back to understand that before I act, is this conflict I feel within me, or am I just perceiving a mirror? And if I avoid projecting, but I still share it from me, other people can look at you and understand. I mean, then instead of conflict and conversation, someone brings up something you hadn't thought about. Instead of, reacting by shame and guilt and, I'm less than, you go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that perspective. So instead of agreeing to disagree, I think it's the point where you get where disagreement is often preferred, because then you have two independent perspectives to draw from, two wells. And that's really, I think, one of the definitions of synchronicity I like is that it's when two people meet and their gods remain anonymous, so that those inner workings are theirs, but they don't put them on and foist them on other people.
Yeah. Kathy went on to say, when I say we, I'm referring to our collective. It's so spooky that we are still here in our denial, even after World War II. And I would just add to this that, she says, I see nature and anxiety and all the other organic states of being that sentient lives experience. Nature is not immune. She's alive. Absolutely, she's alive. And she's alive everywhere. We see that everywhere. And
I think, though, nature does not react ever.
Right.
It responds always. So there's a difference, I think, that it doesn't, it may respond quickly,
Right.
if poison kind of thing, then, there's a plague and they kill those farmers with the locusts. I mean, it does kind of move back, but I don't think that's anxiety.
Right. And so what we're going to do at Mount Madonna in October is we're going to manifest our collective, and it will be just incredibly powerful. I can't even begin to tell you how powerful it will be. But we will see something that none of us have seen before. And some of us know it's there and know how to get there, but none of us have seen what we will produce at Mount Madonna. And so I urge you to come to our confluence in October, because only those who are present will really appreciate what has happened there. It will be profound, I promise you. And one of the things that I want to add to what Kathy said about our denial even after World War II, many people have made themselves feel all right, saying, oh, I would have never done what the Germans did to the Jews. And, obviously that's true, especially among the Jews, never again. But the reality is that, yes, you would. Yes, you would have. And you have to look back on yourself, because if you were in the position of the guards at Auschwitz and you were told to do this, you would have done it. You would have done it. And there would have been a certain amount of joy in it as well. And people who say they hate our former president, if you were Cassidy Hutchinson and you were offered the job of being the secretary to the chief of staff of the president of the United States, you would have taken that job. And you might look back at it with regret, as I think Cassidy Hutchinson does now. But at the same time, if she wasn't there, there are several 100 million other women that would have gladly taken that job if offered. And so, so that's the point. Okay. That's the point. You can't wash yourself free of the guilt that is present there. And I'm sure that even the men who are conniving to become the Republican candidate next time, they're men in a certain position, and they have no choice about how they go about it. I mean, if we take Vice President Pence or Ron DeSantis, they don't have any choice in the positions they're taking right now, because they see with clarity that if they take on the former president now, they will alienate a large part of the Republican base, and so they can't be elected. They would be unelectable. And so right now they're always kowtowing to the former president. But the critical point for them is decided when is the right time to break from him and set your own path. And so if you were in that position, if you were in the position of Governor DeSantis or Mike Pence, you would do exactly the same thing. There's no doubt. If you doubt that, I think you're probably wasting your time on this YouTube channel because the fact is it's in all of us, and it depends on our lives, our fate, how they develop. And some of us happen to find themselves in a position to be offered a job as the secretary to the chief of staff of the president of the United States, and some of us aren't. But if you're in that position and you're applying for that job, chances are you're going to take that job, even though you're going to regret it later.
Well, I'd like to comment too. Your statement of, we can't absolve ourselves of that guilt. Well, what's interesting is that guilt is actually not ours. And if we agree with that statement, then we also would have to agree with that redemption is impossible. And what I find is that it's about making shame walk the plank, because that is not our stuff. And so to change something, I think we have to move on, just like when Jung says, then I wanted to grasp myself, and then I wanted to go on again. But the key point, without knowing what I wanted. So comfortable with the not knowing. And he says, thus I fell into the mystery. And what happens is, if that guilt is always ever present, that leaves an inability to not have conflict and to not resolve disagreements without conflict. And I think it's more important to be unthreatened, so that you can be strong enough to be gentle, fierce enough to be compassionate and listen, but not always chest piece react. You have your opponent. I was watching Jack Ryan last night, and the one general has all the psyche valves of the other generals, so they're taunting and playing the hubris game, easy to taunt, easy to fool, knowing they will react this way. And then, Jack Ryan's saying, he has your psyche valves. I saw them. So don't react your normal way. So he's trying to stay on the straight and the narrow of his orders. If struck upon, he will strike back. And it's interesting because finally there's that's part of the order that as a leader I need to ignore, because I will be the first trigger to war, rather than, it starts with a missile, but then it goes on. So I think there's a whole big mess of responsibility and who's individuated, who's threatened, who's unthreatened. And if you have a threatened leader, that's dangerous. If you have an
Yeah.
unthreatened leader, you have to make sure it's not an autocrat. I mean, so.
Right. So let's move on. There are some comments here. Justin Case made a factual comment, which I'm not going to address right now. So Jordan, you're at you already feel.
Should I therefore not that?
Pardon?
No. Yeah. Should I therefore not that paragraph?
No.
No.
Where's that? I've read that paragraph. You already feel the fist.
There we go. Yeah. You already feel the fist of the iron one on your back. This is the beginning of the way. If blood, fire, and the cry of distress fill this world, then you will recognize yourself in your acts. Drink your fill of the bloody atrocities of the war. Feast upon the killing and destruction. Then your eyes will open. You will see that you yourselves are the bearers of such fruit. You are on the way, if you will all this. Willing creates blindness, and blindness leads to the way. Should we will error? You should not, but you do will that error which you take for the best truth, as men have always done. And his footnote 233 here, the corrected draft has, and we call ourselves Christians, imitators of Christ. To be Christ oneself is the true following of Christ. And
right
continuing.
Yeah, go ahead.
The symbol of the crystal signifies the unalterable law of events that comes of itself. In this seed, you grasp what is to come. I saw something terrible and incomprehensible. It was on the night of Christmas Day of the year 1913. I saw the peasant's boot, the sign of the horrors of the peasant war, of murdering incendiaries and of bloody cruelty. I knew to interpret this sign for myself as nothing but the fact that something bloody and dreadful lay before us. I saw the foot of a giant that crushed a whole city. How could I interpret this sign otherwise? I saw that the way to self-sacrifice began here. They will all become terribly enraptured by these tremendous experiences, and in their blindness will want to understand them as outer events. It is an inner happening. That is the way to the perfection of the mystery of Christ, so that peoples learn self-sacrifice. And he has footnotes 234 and 235, which this may refer to the German peasants' rebellion of 1525. So he's potentially calling in a knowledge of history as a preamble that's in the DNA of the people. And then 235, in 1918, in his preface to the second edition of the Psychology of the Unconscious Processes, Jung wrote, the spectacle of this catastrophe threw man back on himself by making him feel his complete impotence. It turned him inward, and with everything rocking, he seeks something that guarantees him a hold. Too many still seek outward, but still too few seek inward to their own selves, and still fewer ask themselves whether the ends of human society might not best be served if each man tries to abolish the old order in himself and to practice in his own person and in his own inward state those precepts, those victories which he preaches at every street corner, instead of always expecting these things of his fellow men.
Right. Okay, so I want to provide an example of this, feeling the boot or feeling the fist of the iron of iron in your back. Tim Holmes, my great friend and internationally renowned artist, is always struggling with his muse, and he is always trying to get a painting right, and the feeling of the fist in the back is represented by a painting that he's been working on for 25 years. He's not entirely satisfied with it yet, but he has shown it, and therefore I'm going to share it with you because I think it exactly expresses this idea. And so here is Tim's painting. Okay, so this is the knee of his muse in his back, and she has blindfolded him, and he's trying to feel what it is, the next thing that he has to bring forth in his art. And you can see his one hand, his left hand is sort of hovering over the painting, trying to feel what should be next. And in his right hand, he has his paintbrush, and he's trying to express it. I personally, I love this painting because I've felt this many times personally, by, whatever it is, the iron fist in my back or something else in my back that it is. So the muse here represents his unconscious, making him feel what it is that he should be putting on the page.
It's a wonderful image because it reminds me a lot of the Two of Swords, where there's this mind movie going on in the background that you basically embrace with your heart, but put forward in your thinking. So the unconscious becoming conscious. And with my oil paintings, I used to call it the interrogating tensions always driving me forward regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So, skinned knees and dragged behind horses, but the paint would hit the canvas. But there was that point, though, of the hand on the canvas that it was driving by feel. It's like putting on a blindfold and getting on the highway and everyone's safe, except the person not safe is you, but you embrace the danger. I love that knee in the back because it's that perilous being driven forward, the I must from the unconscious. That's a powerful image.
Yep, I agree entirely. Let's see, what did I do with? So
Justin had some comments.
Okay, I'm trying to get back to them because I have lots of comments here. Okay, so there have been some responses which I'll let everybody read. Well, Ravens fan, I wish that you would make comments which are meaningful and not use this YouTube channel as a means of drawing attention to yourself. If you can't do that, I'll dismiss you in a heartbeat. And thank you, Imagine Naruto, for bringing this to his attention. And so I'm not a evil person, or I try not to be an evil person, of course, in my unconscious, I guess I am, but I try to be a nice guy, and I would like to be here. Okay, so I'm going to read on. Did you get all the footnotes?
I did. I think it
Yep.
was up through 230,
235. Okay.
35.
Okay, I'm going to read on
Yeah.
now. May the frightfulness become so great that it can turn men's eyes inward, so that their will no longer seeks the self in others, but in themselves. I saw it. I know that this is the way. I saw the death of Christ, and I saw his lament. I felt the agony of his dying, of the great dying. I saw a new God, a child, who subdued demons in his hand. The God holds the separate principles in his power. He unites them. The God develops through the union of the principles in me. He is their union. If you will one of these principles, so you are in one, but far from your being other. If you will both principles, one and the other, then you excite the conflict between the principles, since you cannot want both at the same time. From this arises the need. The God appears in it. He takes your conflicting will in his hand, in the hand of a child whose will is simple and beyond conflict. You cannot learn this. It can only develop in you. You cannot will this. It takes the will from your hands and wills itself. Will yourself. That leads to the way. And the footnote reads, there's a long footnote here. A long passage occurs here in the draft and corrected draft, a paraphrase of which follows. The God holds love in his right, forethinking, the idea substituted throughout, in his left. Okay, so substitute for forethinking, substitute the idea. So God holds love in his right, forethinking in his left. Love is on our favorable side, forethinking on the unfavorable. This should recommend love to you, insofar as you are a part of the world, and especially if you are a thinker. The God possesses both. Their unity is God. The God develops through the uniting of both principles in the you, me, you, I do not become God through this or become divine, but God becomes human. He becomes apparent in you and through you as a child. The divine will come to you as childlike or childish insofar as you are a developed man. The childish man has an old God, the old God who we know and whose death we have seen. If you are grown up and you can only become more childlike, you have youth before you and all the mysteries of what is to come. The childish has death before him, since he must first become grown up. You will become grown up insofar as you overcome the God of the ancients and of your childhood. You overcome him not through setting him aside, obeying the spirits of the time, the zeitgeist, the spirit of this time always between yes and no, like a drunkard, since he is the uncertainty of the present general consciousness. You, one throughout, can only overcome the old God through becoming him yourself and experiencing his suffering and dying yourself. You overcome him and become yourself. As one who seeks himself and no longer imitates heroes, you free yourself. When you free yourself from the old God and his model, when you have become the model, then you no longer need his, in that the God held love and forethinking in the form of the serpent in his hands. It was shown to me that he had seized the human will. God unifies the opposition between love and the idea. and holds it in his hands. Love and forethinking existed from eternity, but they were not willed. Everyone always wills the spirit of this time, which thinks and desires. He who wills the spirit of the depths wills love and forethinking. If you will both, you become God. If you do this, the God is born and seizes possession of the will of men, and holds this will in his child's hand. The spirit of the depths appears to you as thoroughly childish. If you don't want the spirit of the depths, he is to you a torment. Willing leads to the way. Love and forethinking are in the world of the beyond. So long as you do not will them, and your willing lies between them like the serpent, keeps them separate. If you will both, the struggle breaks out in you between willing love and willing forethinking or recognition. You will see that you can't will both at the same time. In this need, the God will be born, as you have experienced in the mysterium, and he will take the divided will in his hands, in the hands of a child, whose will is simple and beyond being split. What is this divine childish willing? You can't learn it through description. It can only become in you. Not can you will it, nor can you will it. You cannot learn or empathize. You cannot learn or empathize it from what I say. It is unbelievable, however, you can falsify themselves and lie to themselves. Let this be a warning. What I say to my mystery and not yours, my way and not yours, since myself belongs to me and not to you. You should not learn my way, but your own. My way leads to me and not to you. Okay. Pretty profound stuff.
It is, and I think it's also impressive. Carl Jung is one of the only people who can then have a whole page of just footnotes that are important. And it's interesting to me there where the find your own way. I mean, you can model off of other people to learn. You can imitate as a kind of form of the genius of the process, but it's when you find your own way. And that's the truth, the light, the dark, all of it together. Powerful stuff there.
Let's see. I'm just looking. There's a famous sculpture that I thought I could find easily, but I cannot. Okay, there's a famous sculpture of a child that has a snake in both hands, and good old Google just doesn't get it when I ask for that.
Well, the whole child thing here is interesting to me because childish is immature, but childlike is inherently connected and clear in that the love and the clarity of forethinking of the idea. It reminds me of a little girl who's was maybe 4 or 5 on the plaza several weeks ago, and with her dad, and they're walking, and you could tell he was exhausted. He'd had it for the day. And she was exuberant and having so much fun with all the flowers and shops. And she looks up and she yanks on his arm, and she's like, Dad, what's wrong? You look sluggish. And I love that word came from someone of that age. And he said, well, it's the wind. It's kicking up, and it's just so strong, and it's just taking it out of me. And she said, oh, that's okay. Dad, that's just nature. It has to breathe a little harder to birth spring. And, out of the mouths of babes, that was just such an astute, connected, loving, poetic observation she had. And he looked at her when she said that. You could see the life pour back in him. It's like joy entered his face. And at that point, they, kept on walking and all was well. But the fact that they stopped and they had that exchange, the fact that at 4 or 5, she was able to do that and be received that way, that wasn't the first good parenting thing that had happened. So she's part of that family. Instead of being scolded and groomed, she's being listened to. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I found another image that kind of expresses the same thing. Now I'm going to show this, and so here's the warning. It is art, and it shows bared breast. So if this offends you, please turn off your computer now. But this is a statue that was found at Knossos on the island of Crete. And it is dated to 1600 before the Christian era. So here it comes. You have been duly warned.
Most likely nudity and not pornography.
Yes. All right. So here's this image, and it's an enticing mystery, but this is exactly what the other one expresses too, which was the child having 2 snakes. And of course, the caduceus, which is the symbol of the healthcare industry, also has 2 snakes, one on each side, curling their way up. But this comes from 1600 before the Christian era. So this is about the time of Abraham. And so this idea that Jung is expressing here goes back that long. And here's what it says. An enticing mystery. It has been said that the image of the snake goddess, discovered by Sir Arthur Evans at Knossos on Crete, is one of the most frequently reproduced sculptures from antiquity. Whether or not this is true, it is certainly the case that she is a powerful and evocative image. What she meant to the Minoans who made her, however, is not very well understood. But I think Carl Jung would say, I know what it means. He knew exactly what it means.
Well, yeah, sir.
Yeah. So it goes on. It says, in temple repositories, Evans found the sculpture of the snake goddess in a secondary exploration of the complex he called a palace in Knossos. After digging out the entire western wing, he decided to check under the paving stones. Most covered nothing but earth, but just south of the throne room, he discovered 2 stone-lined pits containing a wide variety of precious things, mostly broken, scraps of gold, ivory, faience, the largest deposits of faience in Crete. I don't know what that is. Stone inlay, unworked horn, ceramic vessels, seal stones, ceilings, shells, and the vertebra of large fish, and broken pieces of at least 3 figurines, of which the snake goddess was one. Because of the fragmentary nature of these valuable objects, Evans assumed that what he had found were damaged pieces that had been cleaned out from a temple. He named the pits the temple repositories and immediately set about the reconstruction of as much as he could, with special interest in the figurines, which he assumed were goddesses. So here's the snake goddess prior to restoration by Evans from Yellow Moso, the palaces of Crete. Okay. So anyway, the point is that this is a very old image and idea, the merging of the opposites, and we find it in pop culture, in The Fifth Element, the movie The Fifth Element, where we learn that the element in all the universe which binds everything together is the human being. And we find it in the fifth tarot, where there are normally four suits in the tarot, but one couple has manifested a fifth tarot, which has a fifth suit. Basically, that fifth suit is the human being. And it points out that most of the things that happen to the tarot in the tarot relate to the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is all about opposites, of course. But that tarot deck is showing that there is a union. At least that's my interpretation of it. And Jordan is the expert on the tarot, so I'll leave it to him to comment further.
Well, no, I think you hit it right on the head there, because there's an article I wrote about 8 years ago called "Individuating Through the Tarot," and it just takes the individuation process from the Fool, Magician, High Priestess all the way through to the World, and returns in that spiral cyclical nature of how the personality develops and how the psyche unites with the opposites, brings in the dark to calcinatio to bring it to light, and that's bringing the unconscious to consciousness.
Yeah.
And I just sent you 2 images. I don't expect you to pull them up, but I sent them so I could resave them and put them at the head of my photos. If you'd like, I'll share that screen to pull up there's one of Norman Lindsay's etchings, The Coming of the Fairies. It's such a wonderful image of how the dark looks to and comes through the light, and that it's the unification of the opposites into basically the greater human being. And then there's also a inverted tower in Sintra, Portugal, which is an initiation well. Mm-hmm. So instead of building a tower, it goes into the earth. And right there.
So this is The Coming of the Fairy. It's called The Coming of the Fairies.
Yeah, Fairies by Norman Lindsay. And it's interesting to me that look at how all these monsters, all these evils, they're enamored with basically themselves going from unconscious inside to, through her, this, creative drive, the unconscious, the will into being, becoming conscious. So in a sense, they're going through the whole alchemical process from the background into her as the foreground. And what I also love is the center is not in the middle. The little character to her, to the right in the picture, to her left, they're kind of a dancing couple of the dark and the light.
Yeah. Okay, let me show the well tower too. So
and
this is
Quinta Ascencio Regulera in Sintra, Portugal, and it's actually a tarot initiation well, where they descend through the steps, and there's a well, an ablution well, an initiation rite well at the bottom. And what's interesting about this is a day image, obviously, but what's really cool is when you can get an image, and I haven't found one online, where at night you would see the moon through that oculus, through that opening in the ground at the top. So that's all at the ground level. If you were looking across the park, you wouldn't know it's there, because this goes into the earth.
Right. And we could imagine that this is Jacob's ladder here.
Yes.
It's symbolic of Jacob's ladder in the Bible. And it's the initiation into light and finding the light. very powerful.
Yeah, and then this would be, descending into that inner depth to then
Right.
zoom and rise up and resurrect back into the consciousness of the light. So there's a spirit above, soul below, and they both nestle in each other. And
Yeah.
I think that's that, you mentioned the uniting with the opposites is such a powerful, to me, architectural.
Right. And so you could think of the ablution well as baptism. And then when you because when you're going down into this, obviously it's very, I would think frightening to go down into this dark place. And
I like your nod to baptism. Instead of walking down the nave of the sanctuary, you're descending the downgoing spiral of this, which is more terrifying, which makes the baptism all the more
right. But then,
moving.
then you take the ablution,
Right.
and you look up and you see the light, and you see, in effect, Jacob's ladder there. So, so that's
which makes baptism that much more poignant and deep.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that makes that, I love that you pinned it as the baptism piece, because that makes that more poignant and more deep. And really, then from the baptism, you literally look up, but you're looking up through the depths rather than, oh, look, I'm up and I came to light. I mean, you have the unification together, and the dark depths are still dark and deep, and the light is still up and above. At the same time, though, you feel them both.
Right.
And I think that tends to start to remove conflict in people, because they don't kick back against the dark. They actually utilize the dark as their own inner depths, which is an infinite well.
Right. So I hope these observations are useful to everyone. We are the unity. We human beings are the unity. And, within us emerges, if not God, what emerges from us is a knowledge of God, a knowing rather than a belief. So Coleman Remington says, I was mad to find out from my fellow Christians that God is hands off with punishment until Judgment Day. I always thought God could make you fall down the stairs, say if you made fun of a crippled. Does this sound right? Well, this is definitely what Edward Edinger says, that when you have an accident, very often, your unconscious has sort of connived against you. And once I read that, I kind of recognized that in my own serious accident, which I had when I was 43 years old, where I wasn't very conscious that day. I had my mind on a lot of things, and I stepped out of my car and started to walk across the parking lot with a heavy briefcase in my hand, all weighted down with the issues of the conscious mind. And all of a sudden, boom, I was down and my leg was broken. And I've been suffering from that ever since. And so as a reminder, I actually had a replacement ankle had to be installed in 2018, after I had already suffered with it for 28 years from the repair, which was, I had a prosthesis installed in my leg initially, and then finally they had to undo that whole surgery and replace my ankle, which has worked out perfectly since then. I'm not aware of it being different from my own ankle, fortunately. But that did lead to other consequences. So, when we talk about accidents, God isn't hands off. It's he slaps us up beside the face, lets us know that we're not on the right path. And I readily acknowledge that I was too absorbed in day-to-day life at that point, and boom, I was down.
Well,
And
it reminds me of when in 2000, in 2000, the summer of 2000, I decided after 10 years off, I was going to jump back into martial arts, Taekwondo and Aikido. And the next day I bumped into this guy who was the youngest 6th degree black belt in America, who was American. And it's interesting, we were almost neighbors. So I went to his class. Well, what's interesting is 10 years off, 2 weeks later, I was beyond where I was before, as if everything had just settled in and naturally came back. Except the problem is the speed and the power. I hadn't had those little muscles and the big muscles developed since then.
mm-hmm.
And so you may be moving really fast. You may be moving really powerfully, but your body can't withstand the forces. And I spun around at one point to do this jump kick and literally put all my weight through, but was probably 1.5 degrees off too far into, straightening towards the knee. And immediately I saw the bottom of my foot. My ACL just snapped and my leg folded up, to where I'm kissing my toes basically. And it's relatively strange to stare at the bottom of your foot. You like just this way, it's not like yoga pulling it up in some stretch. It's like all of a sudden I'm staring and it sounded like a chicken bone just snapped it. But then, I of course screamed and then dropped. And then I started laughing. And someone said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Well, Taekwondo, Aiki don't do that."
Yeah, right.
But there was that was
Right.
minor hysteria, because the pain was just snapping a knee is almost, I don't think I'd ever felt something so painful. And then the pain immediately goes away. Of course, then the swelling starts. But
Right.
it was like all hell in 1.5 seconds. And
Right.
it just throws you. And I get that. When I think it's very much like a slap on the face where maybe I shouldn't be doing this so fast.
And for me, I see that moment, which was on January the 4th, 1990. I was 3 years into my study of Dr. Jung, and I see that as my calling into his work. It brought me, I can draw a direct line in my life from then to this moment right now.
Right.
And I wouldn't have been doing the things I've been doing all these years had it not been for that, probably. And, I could easily have ended up following the path of our former president very easily. And that would have been a wrong path for me. But the point is that we have to see both sides. We have to integrate both sides in our psyches.
Right.
And that's the hard part. The hard part is, you don't have to love the guy, but if you hate him, then you're one-sided, and you have to examine yourself. That's the key thing.
I find if you actually go so far as to hate something, or it always annoys you as it goes by, some things are just annoying. But at the same time, look at yourself first. Is there a part of yourself you just don't want to look at that is basically saying, put that out of here, take out the trash? And then you have to integrate and work with that. Otherwise, you'll always have that fly off the handle unpredictably quality that gets people.
So Anthony says, is there any truth in the belief that guilt seeks punishment? And I think I should leave that question unanswered. That's a question that each person must evaluate for themselves. You know, at the times of your life when you felt guilty, do you feel that you were seeking the correction that you experienced? Right. Fair enough. You know, I'll just leave it at that. But I think that, you know, this is right in the heart of what we're talking about. Now,
I like that you
go
didn't
ahead.
answer. I like that you didn't answer, but because I think there's a point there that it's personal to each person. That is the guilt a significator of your move for consciousness of the acts or what have you that caused it towards redemption, or more crime, or more toward behavior that will cause more. So I mean, does the criminal really want to get caught? I think is the old double-blind question, and I guess it goes back to each individual.
Well, we certainly are having plenty of experience with that right now that you can evaluate for yourselves because it's nonstop on cable news. All right, so I want to draw your attention to a footnote that begins the next sentence because you should hear the term. So the footnote reads, "the Great Spirit." And it's interesting that they use that term because that term is very often associated with Native Americans. But the way Jung actually, he had it in the corrected draft as the Great Spirit, but here's how he wrote it in the final version of the Red Book. "The spirit of the depths has seized mankind and forces self-sacrifice upon it. Do not seek the guilt here or there. The spirit of the depths clutched the fate of man unto itself, as it clutched mine. He leads mankind through the river of blood to the mystery. In the mystery, man himself becomes the two principles, the lion and the serpent. Because I also want my being other, I must become a Christ. I am made into Christ. I must suffer it. Thus the redeeming blood flows. Through the self-sacrifice, my pleasure is changed and goes above into its higher principle. Love is sighted, but pleasure is blind. Both principles are one in the symbol of the flame. The principles strip themselves of human form. The mystery showed me in images what I should afterward live. I did not possess any of those boons that the mystery showed me, for I still had to earn all of them. Finis part primus. Okay, this is the end of the first book of the Red Book, and next week we'll be going into Liber Secundus, but we're by far not done yet because there are 2 pages of footnotes, which I will defer to Jordan to read.
So let me open this.
So we're up to footnote 240.
And I love only Jung could have 2 pages of footnotes. And some of them are shown, Sonu Shamdasani, who's then playing the edit game to show what it was and what it came into, which I think is an interesting process to show what it started as, because there's a raw quality and then the going back on himself to edit. So it's not like everything came out clean, So
right. And there's another way of looking at this too, because Shamdasani, Dr. Shamdasani did not necessarily put everything that's in the black books in the red book.
Right.
And he was self-selecting. And so this is why I'm considering that we should read the black books separately. In the future, after, we still have about 60% of the red book to go.
Well,
But
yeah, and also the red book too. We're reading the text, and we're reading the text, notwithstanding having the images in front of us. Like, because basically what happens is this is kind of a Jung's tarot reading of the visual language that he has in his images, and it's interesting that he can go into this much detail, mythologically, philosophically, psychologically, for each picture.
yeah,
And it's, to me, it's a really interesting exercise. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, well, you're reading the red book without pictures. I said, first, you start somewhere, because I think reading with the pictures and the text would confuse most people, because we'd almost need to do a separate type episode to deal with how to read visual story.
well,
And
and indeed we may have to do that. I mean,
yeah,
I have all the images on my computer, and so I might at some point we might at some point go through the images again, because all these things, all these discussions that we do week in and week out, they're all leading you to to the center of your soul. And we can't do that for you. We can point the way, but we can't necessarily do the work for you. So we can jog your mind. We can do the similar thing to what religion does, in the sense of talking about it and talking about it from our points of view, but it's your point of view that counts here. And it's your point of view that you have to evaluate to find your own self. We can't do that for you.
And I also think this text becomes a preamble to introduce the ideas to society of, instead of either or and conflict, the both and is more evolved, more astute, and more developed, so that you can deal with harsh conditions. You can deal with don't waste trouble and find the treasure in the trouble, and weather washes through. But what's the message? And so I think that even without the images first, just the concept of the union, where it's not a muddy blending, it's not averaging two things into gray from black and white, from depth and light, it's or from shadow and light. It's really getting into the nitty gritty of the density of how both of them interact interdependently without losing their identity. So in a
right,
sense,
and if it mushes into gray, then you don't learn anything.
right.
But if you learn the interdependence of these things in your own psyche, you're just going to be a better person. That's as simple as that. Your choices will be better made. All right, so you're going to read on these footnotes?
Footnote 240 and then 241.
Okay, now before you begin that 240 comes after a sentence which reads, "The principles strip themselves of human form." Okay, go ahead.
And then paragraph 240, a long passage appears here in the corrected draft, a paraphrase of which follows: as you saw how pride and power filled men, and how beauty streamed out of the eyes of women when the war gripped the people, you knew that mankind was on the way. You knew that this war was not only adventure, criminal acts and killing, but the mystery of self-sacrifice. The great changed throughout spirit of the depths has seized humanity and forced him through the war, or them through the war, to self-sacrifice. Do not seek the guilt here or there. Guilt doesn't lie outside. It is the spirit of the depths who leads the people into the mysterium, just as he led me. He leads the people to the river of blood, just as he led me. I experienced in the mysterium what the people were forced to do in actuality, which happened outside on a large scale. I did not know it, but the mysterium taught me how my willing laid itself at the feet of the crucified God. I experienced, wanted, Christ's self-sacrifice. The mysterium of Christ completed itself in front of my eyes. My forethinking, the idea standing above me, forced me to do this, but I resisted. My highest desire, my lions, my hottest and strongest passion, I wanted to rise up against the mysterious will to self-sacrifice. So I was like a lion, encircled by the serpent, an image of fate eternally renewing itself. Salome came to me from the right, the favorable side. Pleasure awakened in me. I experienced that my pleasure comes to me when I accomplish the self-sacrifice. I hear that Maria, the symbol of love, is also my mother of Christ, since love has also borne Christ. Love brings the self-sacrificer and self-sacrifice. Love is also the mother of my self-sacrifice. In that I hear and accept this, I experience that I become Christ, since I recognize that love makes me into Christ. But I still doubt, since it is nearly impossible for the thinker to differentiate himself from his thought and accept that what happens in his thought is also something outside of himself. It is outside him in the inner world. I become Christ in the mysterium. Rather, I see how I was made into Christ and yet am completely myself, so that I could still doubt when my pleasure told me that I was Christ. Salome, my pleasure said to me that I am Christ, because love, which is higher than pleasure, which however is still hidden in the pleasure or in pleasure, had led me to self-sacrifice and made me into Christ. Pleasure came near to me, encircled me in rings, and forced me to experience the torment of Christ and to spill my blood for the world. My willing, which earlier served the spirit of this time, zeitgeist, which he substitutes throughout, went under to the spirit of the depths. And just as it was previously determined by the spirit of the time, it is now determined by the spirit of the depths, by forethinking, idea, in quotes, substituted throughout, and pleasure. It determined me through the willing of self-sacrifice and the spilling of blood, my life's essence. Mark that it is my bad pleasure which leads me to self-sacrifice. Its innermost is love, which will be freed from pleasure through sacrifice. Here, the wonder happened that my previously blind pleasure became sighted. My pleasure was blind. My pleasure was blind, and it was love. Since my strongest will of self-sacrifice, my pleasure changed. It went into a higher principle, which in God is one with forethinking. Love is sighted, but pleasure is blind. Pleasure always wants what is closer and feels through the multiplicity, going from one to another without a goal, just seeking and never fulfilled. Love wants what is furthest, the best, and fulfilling. And I saw something further, timely, that the forethinking in me had the form of an old prophet, which showed that it was pre-Christian and transformed itself into a principle that no longer appeared in human form, but in the absolute form of a pure white light. So the human relative transformed itself into the divine absolute through the mysterium of Christ. Forethinking and pleasure united in me a new form, and the willing in me, which appeared foreign and dangerous. The willing of the spirit of the depths lay paralyzed at the feet of the shining flame. I became one with my will. This happened in me. I just saw it in the mystery play. Though this much was made
Through this
known,
much,
through this much was made known. Those crossouts sometimes get through this much was made known that I didn't previously know, like in a play. But I found everything doubtful. I felt as if he was melting in the air, since the land of the mysterium, that spirit, was still foreign to me. The mysterium showed me the things which lay before me and had to be fulfilled. But I did not know how and when. But the image of the sighted Salome, who knelt in rapture before the white flame, was a strong feeling that came to the side of my will and led me through everything that came after. What happened was my wandering with myself, through whose suffering I had to earn what served for the completion of the mysterium I had first seen. And then footnote 241. And I have to say, I have a special affinity for the land of mysterium.
Mm-hmm.
So paragraph 2 or footnote 241 and the sentence prior to 241. Let me see if I can. Could you read the sentence that leads to 241?
Right. Okay. So the sentence before footnote 241 is as follows. Two sentences. The mystery showed me in images what I should afterward live. I did not possess any of those boons that the mystery showed me, for I still had to earn all of them. Okay, go ahead.
So footnote 241.
You want me to read the next one?
I got it.
Okay, good.
Footnote 241, applying to those two sentences. Gilles Gispel reports that Jung told the Dutch poet Roland Horst that he had written psychological types based on the basis of 30 pages of the Red Book, cited in Stefan Haller, The Gnostic Jung, and the Seven Sermons to the Dead. It is likely that he had in mind these preceding 3 chapters of the Mysterium. What is presented here develops the notions of the conflict between opposing functions, the identification with the leading function, and the development of the reconciling symbol as a resolution of the conflict of opposites, which are central issues in Chapter 5 of Psychological Types, Collected Works, Volume 6. The, in quotes, type problem in poetry in his, type problem in poetry in his 1925 seminar, Jung said, I found the unconscious is working out enormous collective fantasies. Just as before, I was passionately interested in working out myths. Now I became just as much interested in the material of the unconscious. This is, in fact, the only way of getting at myth formation. And so the first chapter of The Psychology of the Unconscious became most correctly true. I watched the creation of myths going on and got an insight into the structure of the unconscious, forming thus the concept that plays a role in the types. I drew all my empirical material from my patients, but the solution of the problem I drew from the inside, from my observations of the unconscious process. I have tried to fuse these two currents of outer and inner experience in the book of the types, and have termed the process of the fusion of the two currents the transcendent function. And that comes from his book, Analytical Psychology, in page 34.
Okay, and so we come to the end of Liber Primus. And so next week we will begin with Liber Secundus. In this last bit, I can't help but be reminded of what our objective will be in Confluence 23 in October. And that is that we are going to present to the people who attend both their own unconscious, there will be personal unconscious, and then the collective unconscious in a couple of ways. And I don't have a clue of what is going to be manifest on that occasion, not a clue. And I think of it as a kind of kaleidoscope that isn't yet formulated, and it will, the kaleidoscope will turn immediately after the confluence as well. But in that moment of 3 days together, we will all have an insight about what is happening to us individually, as well as to what is happening to us as a culture. And I hope to share that experience with as many people as possible. We are going to limit it to about 50 participants, including, by the way, the organizers. So there are 7 organizers, and we all have our entourages. So, so the result will be that it's probably in the neighborhood of 35 or 40 people who are not part of the entourage that are going to attend. And so I do hope that you'll put your name in soon as a potential participant. We don't have the formal sign up connection yet on the website, but you can look at the website and start to see what is emerging from Confluence 23. And as I said, you should plan to be there on the evening of Thursday, the 12th of October. This will be Columbus Day, Columbus Day of 2023. You should plan to be there on that date and for that evening. And then the processes that will emerge will begin on that evening and continue throughout the weekend. So I hope you'll all join us at that time. What do you have on your mug?
I was going to say, because if it's Columbus Day, Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492.
Right.
And you have Geronimo, and you have Perico, and you have Reader that are, Chihuahua, Perico, Geronimo, and Chapo. And Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492.
Right. And I would just add to that comment, which I often do, and that is that, we're all immigrants in North America and South America. Okay. Human beings did not exist in the Americas before about 35,000 years ago. So it's just a question of how long you take your lineage back. And so if you want to talk about the real Native Americans, you have to talk about you have to go to the Dinosaur Museum, which is up in Bozeman, Montana, and see what I'm talking about. So if you are interested, thank you, Richard, for saying so, but please write to me at this email address. I'll put it on the YouTube chat so that I can get your name and put you on the list so that we can let you know as soon as the official sign up is available. It's going to be an experience like none other, I'm sure. And I can't tell you, we had a meeting of 12 of us, the 7 organizers, or 6 of the 7 organizers, and 6 people who attended last year's confluence together. 12 of us were together a week ago Wednesday, and we are so excited and jazzed about what it is we're going to do. We just can't wait for it to happen. And in fact, I can't wait for it so much that I'm going to do one of the processes that we're going to do. I'm going to do it in my art classes over the next 4 weeks. And so I'm looking forward to, I've actually started the practice in my Friday classes, and I have to step it forward. It's quite a thing when you have only 1 hour a week to work on it, but we're going to have a whole weekend together to work on it as a group, and that's going to be very, very powerful, I'm sure. So thank you everyone for being here this week, and next week we will begin with Liber Secundus, the second book of the Red Book, the second part of it, the second major part of it. And I'm delighted to have had as many of you as we have had here for the first part of this process, which is phenomenal. And we are very grateful for your loyalty, and many of you have made really superb comments as we've been going forward. And so I look forward